Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Michael McCarville, and this is Fun with Fallen Flags, episode 44. If you're interested in other episodes, go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. Click the bell icon, you get updates, and you can also view all the other ones on there as well. There's also a HO Scale Tutorials Facebook group. Take a look at that and join if you haven't. And a lot of good information on there. Some mine, some from a lot of really talented people that are putting stuff on there too. It's not that old, so go ahead and join. And then I'll be doing a live broadcast on Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Mountain Time. So this is a scratch building project. We're not going to use any kits, no kit bashing, no parts, no castings or anything like that. It's going to be just out of some brass wire, some plastic styrene material, and that's it. I picked up some evergreen scale model stuff. This isn't a sponsorship for them, but this is what the store had. So that's what I'm going to tell you about. 4 different kinds of polystyrene. Half-inch tube. This is going to be the canister that you can see down here in the other picture. It's about a 4-foot diameter is what it comes out to be in HO scale. By 10 feet long is the length that I've cut. There's a 3/16-inch tube, and this is a piece of material that is actually going to hold up the canister. It's going to be the center column. So this is part number 226. The other bigger tube is item 236, and then we have 1/16-inch rod, item 222, and item 212, and that is 0.08-inch rod. Just two sizes of smaller rods, and they're actually pretty close to the same size, but it'll give us a little bit of variety. And that's going to be for those supports. So, before I forget, there's going to be some iron pipe that we used for this building. 1-inch and 3/4-inch brass, and we may come up with some other materials such as the angle iron piece that we used to hold the pipes on that sand house together and made it bracketed and look like it went into the building. So this is going to be a sand tower, and I wanted to make it look as prototypical as possible. That being said, based on the information that I looked for photos online, in books that I had, reached out to even some Pensy groups for prototypical drawings, dimensions, photos. I really didn't get much from any of the resources. I found some photos for Pensy stuff and then ideas from kits and things. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow kind of a mishmash of the photos that I came across and try to extract some standards out of that. Like the canister tends to be a canister and not a funnel shaped device on all the Pensy pictures that I saw. And the supports, there was a lot of different methods, whether they were 2 I-beams or a center column or whatever. So we're going to go with a center column pipe, and then all the sandpipes on everything I saw was about a 45-degree angle, and we're going to go with that. And then we'll bracket that with some of the smaller piping that we have, and then possibly the angle iron that I have, depending on how things work out. So anyway, that's a project. We're going to scratch build the whole thing. We're not going to use any castings or kit bash anything, no parts from anything else. It's all going to be 100%. The base will probably be just a simple block of basswood that we can cement the column into. And then something for the hoses to come down for the sanding hoses too. And I haven't really figured out what we're going to use for that. Probably just some pieces of wire insulation without the wire in it. So that's what we're going to work on. It's going to be 100% scratch built, but it's also going to be weathered. So we're going to use the hairspray weathering like we did on the a lot of stuff. We did it on the steel tower, the Walther steel tower. We did it on the girders for the Art Deco bridge. We're going to use that same stuff from those episodes, but we're going to not weather this too heavily. and then we'll use some chalk powders as well. Okay, so the first part of this scratch build is we need the canister, and that's that 1/2 inch piece of evergreen tubing. It's hollow. Capped it with a piece of styrene plastic, same material, just thin sheet, and then after I trace it out onto the sheet, cut it in a circle and a little oversized, glued it on, and then sanded the outside of that edge just to make sure it was a perfect match and flush. Just note that you want to glue it on the inside, because as soon as you end up sanding the outside, you're going to have sanded all the glue away from it, other than just a little bit on the top. So try to get some glue on the inside. Same thing with the top. That'll be a little trickier because you're going to need to get some glue in there real good, and then cap that, sand that one around so it's flush, and then we're going to insert the 40-foot piece of the smaller tubing down inside it through a hole that we're going to put in the very center of this tube, and then that's mostly just for support. So let's get that done, and then we'll start talking about the 45-degree angle delivery tubes that we're going to add next. Okay, success. So what we just talked about is complete. The cylinder has been capped with a piece of thin styrene. The bottom has been capped with a piece of thin styrene. We've drilled a hole through the bottom and inserted the post all the way into the very top cap of this thing. So it's been glued at this end, it's been glued at this end, so it's pretty sturdy. I'm not really too worried about this. So we want to do the same thing with the piping. So the piping we're going to use, I'm opting for the 1/16 inch rod, item number 222. The other one's a little bit bigger, so it might look good for a structure, but I think this looks better for piping. So the idea is not to drill it into the post, because we want the sand pipes to actually come down out of the container. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to have a short section of it, we're going to cut 1/3 of the way into the polystyrene rod here, we're going to bend it to shape, and then in that joint, to make sure it stays in that position, we're going to fill that gap up a little bit with some just plastic cement. Then when we get to the other end, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have it bend down this way, and then we're going to have a short section here. So we're going to have a piece that looks like that. So 45-degree angle, so we need to bend the top end up, the bottom end down, cut it to length, do that twice, and then drill holes straight in to this container, and then get them all set up. We're going to lay this out on the cutting map and tape it down, and I'll give you an idea what it looks like, and I'll post a couple of shots here. When we're done with all that and that's glued in, then we're going to use another piece of material, and we're going to cross brace this, and I think I'm going to use the angle iron piece that I have. I just like the way it looks, plus I saw a couple of shots on Google searches on some pictures, and they were actually using that material, so that works for me. So let's go ahead and get these things mapped out on the cutting board, cut, notched, glued, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so the pipes are complete. They've been formed, and I drilled 2 small holes up into the bottom part of the canister, the same diameter, the 1/16, and they're just kind of hanging there at this point. So we're going to use a piece of the angle iron scrap, just a straight angle piece. It's a brass scrap that we've been using. We used it on the sand house, so it's kind of nice that we're using the same materials, so it kind of reflects similar construction. So this is going to get glued, see if I can do this, right about there, and that's what these arms are going to attach to. The sand pipes are going to attach to this, so they'll be glued up into the canister, and then onto this, and it'll stabilize them a little bit. Since I'm going to glue it there, I've taken a little tiny 1/4 inch by 1/16 inch piece of just white scrap plastic. You can barely see it right there. That is basically going to be a mounting plate that's welded onto this, and then there's going to be this piece of angle iron is going to get glued to that. So that'll be, so it's not glued onto a curved surface. It'll actually be glued onto that, which is similar to how this was probably constructed anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and glue the angle iron piece in place, glue the pipes to the angle iron, let all that dry, and then we'll look at the next step. So we got that glued up, so it's nice and solid, super glued in. So this is going to look great. And I know we're getting close because I'm wearing my painting shirt today. It was my favorite shirt, got spots on it, now it's my painting shirt. So we're getting really close, and I knew that since this was going to go on a diesel service platform, that I was probably going to need 2. So I threw another one together. It set me back a little bit in time, but now I have 2. So the next step is we're going to put bases on these. So they're essentially going to be a square platform that sits on the bottom. It's going to hold it up. It's going to need to stand. And I'm going to put some supports on the bottom as well off that base. So some I'm thinking some triangular shapes that are going to sit down here, and it'll basically allow this thing to stand, and it looks a little industrial too. So let's go ahead and get that going. Put the bases on, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about painting. Yay, painting! Finally! Okay, it's starting to look like something now. So we have our sand tower. So I grabbed a drywall screw and put a little piece of square plastic on the top here. And in addition to that, I built up a little height because I wanted to make sure that the head of the screw was flush with the bottom. So I built a little box with basswood around the bottom. Painted the whole thing Testor's Aged Concrete Gray. So I'm going to screw this into the center post, and we'll get that done. That should take no time at all. I also used some more of the material that we used for the sand house piping. So we're going to have one of these. It's going to go sink down into the center, and I'll mount it as well. It'll run down alongside the base. So that'll be done. I'm going to do that twice now because we have 2 of these. So get both these done, and then we'll talk about the next step. Alright, so working on 2 of these. They're identical. The delivery sand pipe has been added, and it's bent 90-degree angles at the top, and then it just sits down all the way down, goes into the base here. And then we talked about adding some like triangular metal supports at the base. So I've done that, and there's 4 of those. So both of these have had that added. I think I'm going to add another pair of those on the top so it reflects the same thing. It looks a little more consistent. I'm only going to put 2 of these in, and I'm going to make them probably a little bit smaller than those. So I'm going to add 2 of these here and 2 of these here. Both of these guys are going to look the same. I know I talked about painting, but I just keep working on more stuff on this thing. So hopefully we'll get to painting here really quick, but I do like the way these are coming out. These are looking really good. So a little more detail. It's those little subtle things that you add that people are going to probably not notice, but it just looks a little bit more complex when you're done. So those details really will make the scene come alive. So we add those supports underneath the tank, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so the supports are done underneath the tank here, and in the future I'll add a ladder up the front, but for right now I'm not going to worry about that. So let's talk about weathering. So they're going to be weathered. It's going to be a rust undercoat with silver on top of it. And we're going to spray paint the rust first, a layer of hairspray, and then a layer of um, the final color, the outside color. So what the hairspray does is allows us to put water on the uh, area that we want to wear off. And since hairspray is water soluble, what we can do is we can let that water soak in, and the hairspray layer will dissolve, so it's going to loosen up the paint on the top layer, and the paint on the bottom layer is sticking directly to the model. So any place that we rub, once the hairspray is starting to dissolve a little bit, any place that we rub, it's going to allow us to kind of get to that layer underneath. So it'll look like silver with a layer of rust underneath, but it'll look like it's starting to rust on the outside. So um, I did the same thing on the Art Deco bridge, on the steel water tank videos that I did. So if you have any questions about that, we'll go into a little bit more detail in that. You can also do salt, put a layer of salt in there too if you want, and then that gets it kind of more of a pitted look. But we're just going to go for just kind of normal wear and tear. We don't need the pitted look on these. So spray these with rust, spray them with hairspray, then I'm going to come back and spray them with the silver, and after that I'll come back and we'll talk about wearing off the top layer of paint. Okay, so we've got a coat of gray primer on it, and then on top of that, a coat of Tester's Rust. On top of that, a coat of hairspray. I'm going to let that set, and then we're going to hit it with the final color, which is the silver, which will be the top coat. Um, we'll let all of that dry, and then we're going to get this thing wet and start rubbing away and start wearing off some of that silver layer so we can expose this color underneath. Okay, silver paint is on. I just did a thin layer because we want the water to penetrate the paint layer to get down and dissolve the hairspray underneath. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and get some water on these and then let it saturate for a little bit, and then start rubbing away at it, and I'll show you what we actually do in that process. It can be a little touchy, so you don't want to rub too much. It's better to take it very slow at this stage. Alright, it's time to get started. Get one of these guys out of the way. And I put a very light coat of paint on here, especially right here on this spot. So I'm kind of curious to see how this weathers. Also, I forgot to mention that along the edge here of the tank, on both sides, I did place a little brass strip. It kind of gives it a look like there's a little bit of a seam right there. You can see I got a whole bunch of tools here. And I'll use different ones at different times based on the surface of how I think things are gonna wear, how much action I need. This is definitely the thinnest spot right here. I don't want to rub too much because I will get the rust colored paint underneath to wear off as well. So we'll just take things nice and slow. We'll let the hairspray do its thing. You'll definitely notice when it starts to wear off because the colors are so different. which is nice. And then at some point it'll just become it'll wear off in large pieces, so at that point you'll want to stop just before that. You can see that I'm getting to the point where a bunch of the silver paint is starting to wear off right here, and it gets it to the point where it looks like just like the paint, like the structure needs to be repainted. So I want to make sure that that's consistent on the tank. Okay, the water's definitely starting to get in there now. It's a good thing I put a lot of glue on this thing. The way I'm beating on it. I don't want there to be wear as if there was a lot of traffic on it, because this tank's way up in the air, so it's not going to get that kind of wear and tear. But what you can see is you're starting to see some wear of just little tiny spots here and there, and that's where going at it with the toothbrush really helps. Alright, so you can see that the water has gotten to the point where it's really come through the silver paint layer, and I've got some bigger spots here, so I'm going to stop at that point. Got a bigger spot on top of here. I don't want big spots on this thing, I just want it to look like it's got a little bit of wear and tear. As if it needs to be painted a little bit more. So you can see the front of this now has got some get up here a little bit. The front of this is getting a lot of wear. Now if we screw up, all we gotta do is paint it over again, as long as we know that there's as long as we know that there's a good layer of hairspray underneath it still, which might be kind of tough to judge. A little bit more water. So working this over in a one spot at a time, not trying to do the whole thing at once. Okay, we'll move around the back side. Not sure how clear that is, but you can see there's some definite spots where we've been able to wear through, and there's some really light, kind of almost pixelated spots on this side, which looks like the paint is pretty faded. Remember, water runs downhill, so anything you do, you want to try to keep that motion. We are going to come back behind this with some chalk powder weathering. So this is to try to get some of that, the look that the paint has been wearing through. Oh, got a little bit of brass right there showing. So we're going to kind of try to avoid that piece. The sand delivery line makes it tough because it is brass and it tends to come off pretty easily. Alright, we're getting some good wear there. We're not trying to get everything worn. I don't want the entire tank to be, you know, covered in the same type of wear. Trying to protect that little brass strip with my finger. Okay, we're going to leave it at that. So that's essentially what we have now. Probably going to do a little bit on the top with some powders, get some rust collecting there. Try to do a little bit on the post, just here and there, not really anything major. But I definitely want to wear the footer. These little metallic pieces that are used to support the foot. I want to get some wear on those because that's where people are going to stand, and there's going to be hoses dragged back and forth, tools laying it up against it, and that type of thing. But I don't want to wear the sides so much as I want to do the edges. I don't want to put too much pressure on these because I'm not sure how much they can take. So we got a couple different layers of paint on here. I'm going to take a little bit of that off, put some chalk dust on here, so a layer of black grime and a layer of a little bit of rust here and there. So the layer, what we're doing now is we're trying to get the effect of paint peeling, not rust. Even though there's rust underneath, we want to look like it's peeled. After that, we want to add some rust stains here and there, like around the bracket here, maybe along this bracket in general, just so that it looks like it's rusting through the paint, but maybe not just big patches of paint peeling like we've got on the tank. And then after that, we're going to attack it with yet another layer of just general grime. There's steam and diesel engines that are moving around this equipment. Alright, we're going to call that one done. I like the way it looks. It's very subtle. There's a couple of spots here on this brass wire that I added to make it look like tank seams. We're going to touch this up, that spot there, this spot up top. We'll touch that up with a little bit of paint. I could probably use black at this point because I'm going to come back and hit this thing with some grime and some rust, so it won't be noticeable. But I like the way the bottom stand looks. I'll add a couple of still shots real quick so you can kind of see what it looks like a little more close up. So let me finish number 2 and then we will start talking about chalk powders. At this point we are ready to do some weathering with powder. I've got a couple of photos on one of my screens on my computer that is some searches for some sand towers that I found. Leave those up, kind of give me some ideas of what I want to end up with. This is just regular chalk powder from art supply store place. And I just take an X-Acto blade and grind it up. So you're going to leave a little bit of soot on the top where it's going to collect. And then otherwise we're going to add, I've got 2 different kinds of rust powder here. We can do more than one coat if we want to, but we'll see what the first coat looks like. A big advocate of adding 1 coat at a time. Add it as you need it. It's easy to add a second layer, but going to ruin things if you decide you want to take it off later. So I'm starting with a little bit of rust powder around the top edge and brush it down the length of the sand tank. Use a little bit lighter color. Just all around the top edge, and then a slightly darker color in places, just to get some contrast. Any place that the top surface is going to have water collect on it, we want to add some of the rust. So this cross member, it's going to get a good coating of light rust. Any place where there's joints, they're going to be welded. Water's going to collect there, so we want to do that as well. And then any place that there's rust, we're going to have the water flowing off of those spaces, so we're going to want a little bit of rust coming down off the side of that. Depending on how much maintenance that the facility that you have is going to get, it's going to determine how rusty you're going to make things. If it's a mainline major railroad, probably not as much. Depends on if they're starting to fall into disrepair, you may want to add a little bit more. The underside of this, I'm going to give some of the darker rust to, as if it's been uh, rusted for a longer period of time, a little bit more neglect. And then the supports down towards the bottom, the rust is going to come off of those. All the water is going to come downwards and settle. So the platform on the bottom is probably going to be given it's going to get a fair amount of rust just because it's going to collect here. And all this is to accent the rust that we've already given by the hairspray paint chipping that we've already done. A couple of spots of rust on this vertical pipe, nothing major. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and hit this with a coat of dull coat, and then we'll come back and we'll do the black layer. Okay, quick shot of dull coat and we're back at it. So we're going to want to do the black really lightly. It's gonna cause the rust powder a lot of times will get kind of diluted when you dull coat it. The black not so much. So whatever you put on, you should just assume that it's probably not going to get diluted much at all. So we're going to do all the top surfaces, anything where soot would settle, but we don't want to do anything like we don't want to essentially paint it on. We want to do it so there's a little bit of variation on it. We don't want an even coat. You can also cover up some of the areas maybe you think that you wore off a little bit too much paint. Good example is this spot here. Any place that's close to the exhaust of the engines, the steam or the diesel. So we're going to discolor the pipes a little bit. Go a little heavy on the very top. This is probably where exhaust is going to settle. And then a few spots down on the very base of it. Okay, we'll dull coat that and we'll see how it looks. Okay, looks pretty good. I didn't want to overdo it because this is going to be on a Pennsylvania Railroad service platform, so I figured it was going to get some maintenance, but it does have a little bit of rust and a little bit of grime and stuff on it, so which would be normal. The last step is to add the sand hoses on here. And all this is I had an old set of headphones that I just didn't want to throw away, but nobody was using them and nobody wanted them. So I took the earphone off of one of the lines, and it's just this thin rubber hose material. And again, I don't really go out of my way to save everything, but some stuff I have, and I'm like this, I was like, I'm probably going to use that at some point. And I am. So I cut sections off of it. So you can see it's not very long. Just going to hang down. So let me add these on, and I'll throw some still pictures up, and then you guys can take a look to see what the final product looks like. I'll display both of these, and there may be one that you think looks better than the other. So let me get these hoses put on, and then I'll put some still pictures up. Okay guys, that's going to do it. My name is Michael McCarville. This has been episode 44 of Fun with Fallen Flags. We have our 2 sand towers complete. We have the sand house that we completed on an earlier episode. So they're going to look great together. If you're interested in getting updates to this YouTube channel in the future, make sure you hit the subscribe button and then the bell icon. That way you'll be sure to get updates. Also, feel free to join the Facebook group. HO Scale Tutorials. That's a group that's fairly new. By all means, join it. Bring along whatever tutorial information that you might want to share with the group. Wednesday night, which is tonight, we're going to have a live broadcast session as well. So feel free to jump in and join those. If you're in the group, you should be getting an update for that. So once again, I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you on the next episode, episode 45.